Well, welcome once again. This is our fourth session of our saints class. For all the saints. And again, I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Last week when I came in, I enjoyed listening to Dr. Bill, and Dr. Bill said, "Well, I kind of overdid it the previous week by doing 3 saints." Right, because we had only planned on doing 2 saints per week, and then I responded back to Dr. Bill saying, "But you also did 3 saints, right? Saint Francis, Saint Clare, and Saint Agnes."
Well, she got good at the end.
Yeah. So today, and I thought, okay, and I said I was going to do 3 saints today, but then 3 saints is a lot, especially with some of these life stories that are really complex and long. So I'm actually only going to do two, but I'm also going to add something else in, and that has to do with the fact that because last week Dr. Bill covered St. Francis, I wanted to just take a few moments and talk about the religious orders, right? So we'll start with that. But before that, we should start with prayer. So let's join me in prayer. Oh, gracious God, we give you thanks for always bringing us together and giving us opportunities to learn and expand our understanding and our minds, and just to be engaged in growing and learning. It's what makes life enriching and fun, and the fact that we are living. Growing is a part of that. And so, God, we thank you for this time that you give to us, and we pray that your Spirit be upon us and guide us as we engage in conversation, discussions, and learning. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so again, St. Francis St. Francis started or founded a religious order called the Franciscans, right? Not just San Francisco, but the Franciscans, yes. San Francisco is named after St. Francis of Assisi. So there's actually several. There are actually hundreds of different orders in the church. But they kind of fall into 4 basic categories. Now, some people say that there's more categories because it keeps on evolving. Which actually is a good thing, because if things are stagnant, well, the only things that are stagnant are things that are dead, right? Because if you're talking, yes, because if it's living in life, then it's changing, it's transforming, and there's varieties. So there are 4 primary categories of religious orders in the Catholic Church. Now, I say that in the Catholic Church because primarily these are observed in the Catholic Church, but other denominations also share in some of these understanding. But these are primarily in the Catholic Church. There is the monastic. So again, so these orders, there's the monastic order, there's the mendicant orders, there are the canon regulars, and then there's the cleric regulars, and I'll explain what that means. Oh, I call it rule. The word regular comes from the word rule. Yeah, so when you go and order a drink at Starbucks or anything, actually you can't say regular because they'll be like tall, grande, no. So, but if you go somewhere and you ask for a regular size, what do we normally mean by that? Medium, the basic, right? It basically means the rule. This is the normal size. This is the rule size. The word canon is the same word. The word canon means the rule, like a ruler, the standard. So I know canon rule means like rule. It is. It actually does mean that. But I explain why it's called canon. But that's why when we say that the Bible is canonized, it means that when the Bible became completed, it became standardized as the 66 books in the Bible. It's the standard. Yeah, and so yeah, when you order drinks, the regular means that is the standard size, but then people wanted variety. So you can either get it smaller or larger, but the regular means that is the standard size. Anyhow, so these rules. So the monastic order, just kind of give you an understanding of the slight differences of these. The monastic orders focus on a life of prayer, right? And for those who are part of the monastic order, they live and they work in a very much an isolated communal setting. In fact, all of them live in a communal setting. For the monastic orders, most of them live in monasteries, right? And there is a slight difference between a monastery and some of the other things I will talk about. And their purpose for most of the monastic orders, the purpose is to dedicate their life for spiritual growth, deep contemplation, to grow closer to God, and to find that inner purity, that inner enlightenment. The life of a monastic monk, what does that look like? Right? And I wish I had more slides, but I'll just kind of explain to you. A typical life, and you can Google this too, a daily life consists of, most of these regiments, they all like to get up early. It's like it's part of the discipline, spiritual discipline, to get up early, right? How many of you love getting up early? Well, there you do. What's early? It's relative. Yes. Majority of this is like 5 o'clock. Yeah, you should be up by 5 a.m. No?
I'm awake. I just think I love it.
Okay. So majority of these, they start the day around 5 o'clock. And the first thing they do when they wake is not check their cell phone. They spend usually an hour or so in prayer. The very first thing is prayer. Now you think you would fall back asleep, but a part of the monastic life is you spend a lot of time in prayer. So the day usually starts waking up early, spending an hour in prayer, and then they enter into morning worship. After worship, they have breakfast, usually as a community. Followed by working, after breakfast, they then spend time working on the grounds of the monastery. After you they spend some time on the ground, there is always a midday prayer. In the Catholic Church, there are these hours of prayers. In the Anglican Church, it's called, the offices of prayer. And so there is always that morning prayer. There's the midday prayer. Lunch is typically eaten in silence as part of that individual time, and then the afternoon is spent in silent meditations and prayers and studies, right? Individual time. Or rest, nobody would know, because it's individual time. And then there is then afternoon prayer, followed by usually an evening worship called Vesper, and followed by a light supper, followed by more prayer, and then early lights out. Right? Just because you wake up early doesn't mean they live a busy life. They have enough hours of rest. It just means you just go to bed early, you get up early, and that's typically a life of a monastic monk. An example are Benedictine monks, right? And the reason I brought this up was because I would be talking about Saint Benedict. Mendicant orders. Now, the word mendicant, have you guys ever heard that word before? Mendicant is a word that I forgot the root word for it, but basically it means it's a vow of poverty. So the mendicant orders are typically the Franciscan monks, the Dominican monks, the ones who basically those in these orders take a vow of poverty. Now, so does a lot of the monastic monks as well, but in fact, many of them, all of them, actually do take a vow of poverty. But particularly the mendicant monks, their vow of poverty is to be in solidarity with the poor. And so much of the ministry and their life is to serve the poor. So the mendicant monks, they usually live in communal homes, not necessarily monasteries, because monasteries are homes, abbeys, that are in isolated settings, right? So monasteries are communal settings that are separated out from the world, right? Or the craziness of chaos. And so the whole idea of that is to separate themselves from the craziness of the world. Mendicant monks or mendicant orders do not separate from the world. Their homes are in the world. Why? Because their purpose is to serve the poor in the world. And so they are usually in communal homes, again, Franciscans and Dominican monks. So what is a typical day? And what do they do in terms of, again, they engage society, working in parishes or schools, but definitely in ministries that serve the underprivileged. Their daily life consists of, again, get up early, morning prayer, observance of Holy Mass right before breakfast. So again, similar, the prayer, and then worship, have breakfast, and then they actually go to work. They go to work, but not just any work. Either at schools, usually at schools, or in the parish, or in ministries that serve the poor. They have they make sure that they take time for their midday prayers, and then when they return from work, the very first thing they do is have their Vesper service, which is typically a 5 o'clock worship service. And after that, they have dinner and evening prayers, individual studies before lights out. And that's a typical life of a Dominican or Franciscan friar or a monk.
Franciscan monks lived in the Camarillo ranch house for a few years.
There you go. Yeah. So they don't necessarily live in isolated monasteries that are out in wherever. They are, in community. Canon regulars. So canon regulars are priests who live together in community. Okay, so these are almost like our regular priests, our regular those priests in the Catholic Church. Now they do live in community, meaning most priests don't have their own homes. They're not supposed to. In fact, part of their vow of poverty is a vow to not have any personal possessions. So the homes that they live in are the homes that are owned by the church, right? Whether it be a rectory or the abbey. Now, question: what's the difference between an abbey and a monastery? Isolated, right? There you go. All abbeys are monasteries. They don't necessarily, not all monasteries have to be in complete isolation, and there are some priests that, or canon regulars that spend their time away from societal civilization, so they would be in monasteries, but it's the way a monastery is governed. So some monasteries are very communal, meaning there is no hierarchy, or it's basically the brotherhoods or the sisterhoods. But if there is a senior hierarchy called the abbot, that is an abbey. So an abbey has an abbot. Or an abbess, yes. Ooh, okay. And then the final one is a cleric regular, cleric rule. And these are priests who live in community. Now, whereas the primary function of canon priests or canon regulars are, they also have jobs, but their jobs is pastoral ministry. So basically, these are, like I said, are the usual priests, the priests that most of us are familiar with. And their day is very similar with the others. They all get up early in the morning, start with prayer, have breakfast, devotional time, but they go to work usually at a parish, right? At a church or a seminary or something. They carry out pastoral duties. That's their typical thing. Yes. And again, yes, like most of our Catholic churches, they do pastoral duties, care for the parish and the people, and they don't have any personal property. The cleric regulars are those who, again, live in community, but focus on apostolic work. Now, what is an apostolic work? The word apostle is to take the message out. Not just parish work, but it's the ones that do their ministry out in what in the Methodist Church we call these extension ministries. Not local church ministries, but extension ministries. It's not necessarily proselytization in terms of banging someone in the head with a Bible. Their proselytizing or witnessing or their apostolic work is to do work in hospitals and schools, in other agencies or other settings. What is that? Catholic charities.
There's Jesuit schools, right?
Jesuit schools, and they are the primary example of Jesuit. And next week, we'll learn about Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuit school. So you'll hear more about that. They're great teachers. So the difference between the cleric regulars and the canon regulars is the setting of their work, the setting of their ministry. The canon regulars are the ones that serve in the parishes, and the clerics are usually beyond the parish.
Question. So they're all priests? I don't know, what's the difference between a priest and a monk?
They're all ordained, yes. Ordained, yes. So they're ordained. Now, again, this is the Catholic Church. So there are also female orders, right? Like the Order of Clare, after Saint Clare. And they do. They have their own abbey or they have their own monasteries. Again, men and women are usually separated in many of these structures. But they are all ordained. Now, there is a third form of order. It's called the third order. Right? Okay, so wait, I thought, how do we get third out of, there's four here, right? So the first order are those who devote themselves to the work of spiritual growth, spiritual learning, and the work within the parish, right? The work within, so monastic monks, they usually do their work on the grounds of the monastery, right? The canon rules are those who serve within the parish. Those are called first order. The second orders are those who do work beyond the parish. So there are like the Jesuits, right? Things like that. The third order are the lay people. So they are not ordained. So there is actually a third order grouping.
Is that called deacons?
Yes and no. Yes, in some contexts they are called deacons. In the Catholic Church, they are called deacons. It's not to be confused within the Methodist Church, because in the Methodist Church, deacons are ordained. In the Presbyterian Church, deacons and elders are not ordained, right? In the Baptist Church, deacons and elders are not ordained. Pastors are just pastors. Yeah, but there is a in the Catholic Church, there is a third order that are specifically for lay people.
What specifically is the difference between a priest and a monk?
Oh, the difference between a priest and a monk. So the priests are terminologies that are specific to those who carry out pastoral duties. Right? So that's why you usually call them priests that are, the canon rules are the priests. We don't really call Benedictine monks priests.
Priests have to be able to give the sacraments.
Yes. And that's part of the ordination. And they're not solitary. Again, because they're doing pastoral duties for other people. And monks tend to be, yeah, so the terminology, yes. The monastic orders, monks, sometimes we do call them Franciscan monks, but usually we call them Franciscan friars. And priests. And Jesuits, we do call them priests, Jesuit priests. Terminology kind of varies. In the Methodist Church, even the word pastor, it's gray, because according to our Book of Discipline, only the senior pastor is a pastor. Associate pastors are associates, but not necessarily the pastor. And deacons, those who are even ordained but serve in outside ministries or specialized ministries, are not called pastors. They're not supposed to be called pastors. But in the English language, we just call everyone pastors.
They call me Pastor Bill, and all of me.
Exactly. And you get away with it.
The executive director said, it'll be too confusing.
It's too confusing.
They'll call you pastor.
And the orders, yes. And so, yes, so all of these orders, there's a whole structure of them, which can get confusing.
And what's the process of like being ordained?
The process of being ordained, in a nutshell, I guess, begins with what we call a calling, right? You are usually called for that office of ordained ministry, and there is a rigorous process of discerning that calling, whether you're validating that calling through your own spiritual, private, personal reflections, as well as reflections with others that validates, yes, I see the gifts of ordained ministry in you. That process is pretty much similar across the board. Catholic Church, Methodist Church. Now, some churches have a different way of ordaining. Like in the Baptist Church, which tends to be very autonomous, local churches autonomous, you get ordained within the local church. In the Methodist Church, you get ordained by a bishop in our annual conference. In the Catholic Church, ordination is only given through the bishop, right? And it's through the diocese. In that sense, the Methodist Church have some similarities there. In the Presbyterian Church, you are ordained by presbytery. Yes. So there is a hierarchical structure, but it's done through the laying of hands of the elders, right, which are lay people.
And I think that it is universal within whichever part of the Presbyterian Church you have.
Yes.
As opposed to just being Ventura County.
Yes.
Or the Santa Barbara Presbytery.
Right. And so and this is when among different denominations, there is a, what do you call that? Professional courtesy, right? Yeah, where we recognize ordinations of other denominations, but not all. So in the Methodist Church, we recognize ordinations from the Presbyterian Church. We recognize ordinations from the Lutheran Church. We recognize ordinations in the Catholic Church. We recognize ordinations in the Episcopal Church. The mainline denominations we recognize. We do not recognize ordinations in the Baptist Church. In the Baptist Church. Yeah. Why not? Because the requirements for ordinations is vastly different. Whereas in the Presbyterian Church, ordination requires seminary education and the validation of call, seminary education, and a process, part of the process, the final process of ordination is
I know part of it's a
like-
statement of faith.
it's like passing the bar. You basically, you are interviewed by a authorized body that you are defending your call. So it's almost like for getting a PhD, you have to provide that defense, right? Same thing, same process. So the Methodist Church has that process. The mainline churches have that process. Baptist churches don't.
Am I correct? It's interesting. Doesn't it start at the local church level?
It's the call starts always at the local church level, meaning if someone here says, I feel like I have this nudge that God is calling me to ordain ministry, it has to be validated first in the local community of faith. The pastor of that church has to sign off on it saying, yes, I know this person, I have met with this person, I have had conversations, and I validate that this person might have a call to ordain ministry. They get passed on to then. Yes, right. It starts with the conversation with the pastor, but it then has to go to the charge conference where in Methodist Church, the SBRC, the Committee on Staff and Parish Relations, has to sign off on it. And then it's voted by the whole church. Then it goes on to the district level, and the district level interviews and validates and then signs off on it. Then it goes to the conference level, and then the conference board of ordained ministry interviews, validates, and then signs off on it. And only then does the bishop ordain.
I can see why this was hard to do in a nutshell.
Exactly. And something that I've had conversations with not only Catholic priests, but also Jewish rabbis. The process is typically about 10 years. Yeah, it took me, I received my calling in 92-ish, and when I was ordained, it was 1999. So it takes a good amount of years. Because part of that is education, right? You spend 3 years, 3, 4, 5 years in seminary. But you have to go through all these other interviews and all of that. I have a good rabbi friend, and he and I were, ordained similar time. And he said, yeah, it took me 10 years. So yeah, similar processes all across the board. For those that we actually recognize. The ones that we don't recognize are those that you can get ordained within like a year. Or online. That's right. We do not do it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Time is running away. I have two other guys I have to talk about. Okay. So Saint Benedict. So Saint Benedict was born in 480. So we're talking about 5th century. And I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, it feels like last year, no, 2 weeks ago that every 500 years, there's a disruption or a split in the church, right? Well, it was right around the time when Benedict was around. Okay, so Saint Benedict is the founder of the monastic order. Okay, now before Benedict, there were monasteries and there were communities of monks, but they were very loose, and majority of those monastery or that monastic life kind of reflected the communities, the isolated communities from our Jewish ancestry. So the Qumran community, the Essene community, all had that isolated, segregated, communal living. A lot of them, so prior to Benedict, there were these monastic communities. What he did was actually define it and standardize it. And part of that, he is considered to be, one of the fathers of the church or doctors of the church, but some would even say the savior of Western Christianity. Because of what was happening during that time. So again, he was born around 480 AD. We don't know exactly because he wasn't some person that people thought, oh, we got to keep track of when this guy was born and da da da. It was only afterwards that people realized, who was that guy? You know, how important he was. He was born to a Roman noble family in the city of Nursia, which is in central Italy. And as a youth, and again, a lot of people or families of wealth or of means would send their children, their sons, to Rome for higher education, right? And so, or higher education or extended education. So Benedict was sent to Rome during his studies. Now, again, be very mindful of the year. So he was born around 480. So by the time he goes to school, he's around 490s, just before 500, okay? And when he got there, he was very disillusioned by the culture in Rome. How many of you guys been to Rome? Don't you love Rome, right? So romantic, and I don't know, I was there in the summer, and it was just crazy. Chaotic. Well, he was disillusioned not because of how busy or things like that. No. He was disillusioned because what he found there in Rome was people who lived licentious lives and just sinful. Why? Why was it like that? Well, because again, the timeline, if you look at, think of what happened at the latter half of the 5th century, it was the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, started in 63 BC, and so to be around for 500 years, that's pretty amazing. Well, prior to that, in the 4th century, 395 AD, the Roman Empire had already split. Okay, it split after Emperor Theodosius the First. The empire had split. Now, even prior to that, with every emperor, when an emperor dies, it's not always clear who the successor is going to be. And oftentimes, if they had multiple children, there would be a conflict between the children. If they didn't have children, then usually the generals would fight against each other. And there's always been this turmoil. Well, when Theodosius died, he had 2 sons. And by this time, the Roman Empire had gotten extremely large, to the point that it was hard to manage. Again, these are days before email or telephone or anything like that, right? So how do you manage a vast land of that size? And so after Theodosius died, basically the empire split officially into 2 groups. The Western Empire and the Eastern Empire, each of his sons taking over one half. And with the 2 empire, or the split, each of the sons developed their own, they had their own political groups. There you go. No problem. It's all right. So they had their own political bodies. And so not only they had their own political bodies, but they also had their own economic systems, and the culture between the East and the West had started to kind of divide apart. By 476, or actually even before that, so all throughout the 4th century and early 5th century, again, Rome was very large, and what happened with the empire being that large is you had a constant flow of invaders all around the borders. You guys know about this, right? Roman history. And so for them, they were fighting off what they called the barbarians. And it was one thing when everyone was under one rule, but with the separation of the two rules, they had a harder time. And by 476 AD, the Western Empire falls to the invasions of the barbarians. The barbarian king Odoacer, killed the last emperor of the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire continues on as what is known as the Byzantine Empire. So the Eastern Roman Empire becomes the Byzantine Empire, and that lasts for another 1,000 years until 1450 something, when the Ottoman Empire, when the Turks would kind of take over. But in 476, the Western Empire, Roman Empire falls, and when that happens, society goes into chaos. It's basically overrun by the Germanic barbarian king and societal values and all of that. And so this is the type of world or city that Benedict entered into. And seeing all this violence and chaos and licentiousness, he says, this is not the type of life that I came to study. And so he leaves Rome, and he goes and he enters the wilderness. He spends 3 years. Well, actually, he goes out into the wilderness, and he keeps going, and he enters, or he goes to a region called Subiaco, where he meets a monk, Romanus. And the Romanus basically gives him, invites him to be part of that life. And he finds a cave there, and he spends 3 years in this cave, sort of living a life of a hermit. But Romanus was a monk. Okay, he was already a monk, and so kind of introduced him to a life of a monk, a life of study, a life of prayer. During solitudes, there were other monasteries there, and he was basically sustained by the generosity of these other monks. At the end of those 3 years, or towards the end of the years, he gets invited by one of the other monasteries to come not only join them, but to become their abbot. All right. So by this time, he had some relationship with them, and so he's invited to become their abbot. And at first, he says, "Oh, I don't know," right? But they quickly convince him to come be part of their order and to guide them, because they had seen how disciplined Benedict was in living in that cave, in that monastic life. But soon after he comes over and he starts sharing, this is how we're going to live, right? Kind of sets the rules. They reject him. The monks. Oh, monks? Oh, other monks. They reject him. And here you have these incredible stories. Now, again, we don't know, there is no biography, as Dr. Bill said last week, they aren't biographies of these saints. They're hagiographies, right? Basically holy writings, basically stories told by the church to venerate some of these folks. And the story, the life of Saint Benedict, the only writing or accounts of Saint Benedict is written by Pope Gregory the First, Gregory the Great, the one I spoke about a couple weeks ago. Because he was, in his writings, he was highlighting some of these significant folks that have gone unnoticed. And in the stories, he tells about the time when he was trying to establish order in these monasteries, and how these other monks, not monks, rejected his strict rules and tried to kill him. Yeah, I know. Typical monks, right? No. In one incident, so here's the story. In one instance, they were so upset by his strict rules that they tried to kill Benedict by poisoning his drink. Okay, you see that chalice there with the snake? And Benedict, as his custom as the abbot, was praying over the chalice, and the chalice just exploded. They said that it was as if instead of making the sign of the cross, he took a stone and threw it. That's what they said. That's what he said. It was it. Yeah. And so that was a sign that, okay, there was some miracle number one, right? In another incident, another priest named Florentius became very envious of Benedictine's rule or his control over the monastery. And so he tried to ruin him by poisoning his bread. There's the bread, right? And same thing as Benedict was praying over the bread, a raven flew in, took the bread and flew away with it. As if God sent the raven to, sacrifice the raven, but yeah, okay, but save him, right? So those are the stories. There are other stories. In fact, there were multiple stories. So during those years, he was basically not liked. He was disliked by the other monks. And after so many years, he finally left Subiaco.
Yeah, and some of these monasteries at the time were quite
Political?
Religion?
Yeah, they were.
Letters.
Because they had some secular accounts. So,
What actually happened behind closed doors?
so he was, when it says he was strict, he was probably just trying to
Maintain order. Exactly. And that is true. Exactly. Well, in fact, that was the other accounts, that another way to ruin him was they would send prostitutes. They would call the local town prostitutes to go visit him at the monastery. And he turned all of them away. But it was an ongoing thing, to the point that he said, I'm done with this. And so he left. So in the process of doing that, when he left Subiaco, he ended up going for he ended up establishing 12 different monastic communities, 12 monasteries, including what is known as the Monte Cassino, which is a very important, significant monastery. So this monastery, so what happened in the monasteries that Saint Benedict, again, establishes that during his time, he established a certain structure to the monastic life. And as I was mentioning when we were going through the different orders, that type of very strict life or regimented schedule was what he expected of all his monks. It wasn't just, hey, I don't like my home, I want to go, live with these guys. It wasn't a fraternity house. Monastery was not a fraternity house, but apparently some felt like it. And so he tried to establish order, and so he created this very structured. So that's before 1940, and again, throughout the century, again, it was established back in the 6th century, 500s. And so throughout those years, with the Crusades and all the other things, that monastery has been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. And that over there was because of World War II. During World War II, we, the Allies, thought that the Germans had been using the monastery as a secret hideout, which they found out weren't. But we sent in bombers and completely destroyed it. And only after it was destroyed that they found out, oh, I guess not. But it was rebuilt. And, in the 60s, it was rebuilt. And again, they followed the exact blueprints and tried to build it exactly. Anyhow, so why are these monasteries so important? Because what was happening is that all throughout history, and we know, how many wars, how many battles, how many conflicts has occurred throughout this history. And each time there is a conflict, there is always a danger of monasteries being destroyed, churches being destroyed, cathedrals, or whatnot. And what's usually in the cathedrals or the sacred buildings? Holy relics. Holy relics, and particularly manuscripts. And the reason why we don't have original manuscripts is so many of them had just been destroyed. The Benedictine monks, after he died, they shaped the church by being the ones who took it upon themselves to preserve. And so during all of the conflicts, the monasteries and the monks had a certain level of, at least, respect that the soldiers and the warriors and whatnot, except for times like that, yeah, you don't just go around ravaging monasteries. There was a level of respect for the holy sites, right? Or the holy orders. And so because of that, all of the artifacts and the manuscripts were preserved by the Benedictine monks in the Benedictine monasteries. A lot, and not just the scriptures, but other things. Yeah, classical literature. Pope Benedict, and so yeah.
So was that church called St. Jerome's? Because it said on the top of that last
Oh,
one.
did I mess up? Oh, sorry, no. I take my previous slides and I redo it. St. Benedict. So St. Benedict, he died. Do you know when he died?
547.
Oh yeah, the year is 547. Do you know what date? Nope. March 21st. I know. So why is it July 11th there?
Saints' Day?
Huh?
Is that his Saints' Day?
Yes and no.
I'm getting a lot of that, aren't I?
Saint Benedict, again, he is one of those saints that not much is written about him. So they don't know exactly. Now, they do know that he died on March 21st because his followers had written that. But the church, with their messed up documentations and whatever, didn't know for a long time, and he wasn't canonized until the 13th century. And so by that time, they, at one time, had observed the feast of St. Benedict on March 21st. But then they changed it to September. And then it got changed to July 19th in the last century. How they came up with July 11th, I have no idea. I think it's the only open date.
Calendar conflicts.
right. He is the saint. And just kind of a little about his sainthood. So his primary contribution, of course, is defining the monastic life, and again, because of the monastic order preserving so much of Western Christianity. But again, what is Europe? What would our Western civilization be without Western Christianity, right? So he is the patron saint of Europe, all of Europe. He's considered the patron saint of Europe. He's also the patron saint of being poisoned. So, if you feel like you got poisoned, you would pray to Saint Benedict to heal you, because apparently he had a certain gift. And of course, he's the patron saint of monks, because he's the one that kind of defined that. All right, quick. Saint Anselm of Canterbury. All right. Saint Anselm of Canterbury, I think we've covered him once when we did the history, right? Yes? No? I don't know, it's a long time. Yes, ontological argument. I'm actually going to talk a little about that. Okay, so Saint Anselm of Canterbury is another saint that is extremely important in the life of the church. But, again, if you're part of the Catholic Church, you know Saint Anselm. Now, how many people have heard of Saint Anselm? Not as... You know a church by that name. Yeah. But there's no city by that name, Saint Anselm. Right. But he is extremely important. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that's why he's known as the Saint Anselm of Canterbury. Sometimes he's also known as Anselm of Aosta? Because that's actually his hometown. Aosta is his hometown. Or Anselm of Bec, which is where his seminary was. He lived in he's 11th century, so he was born in 1033. So he was rich. He was born to a rich landowner in Aosta, which is in northern Italy. And his father was a noble, a landowner in northern Italy. And he basically wanted his son to follow in his footsteps and become a noble himself. But Anselm, from a very young age, felt that he didn't want to become like his dad. He was very rebellious. And he felt that God had other plans for him, but he couldn't figure out what. And so from a young age, he prayed every night for God to show him what he was called to be, what he was supposed to be growing up. As he got older, at the age of 13, or actually 15, he wanted to enter the monastery to discern more what he was supposed to do. He didn't know that he was going to become a monk. But his father refused. And the father had it in with the local monastery abbot, and so the abbot refused entry, declined Anselm from entering the monastery. So until the age of 23, he basically, did what his dad did and always felt this uncertainty or unrest within his heart. In fact, he actually fell into deep depression after being rejected by the monastery. He felt that he would never know what he was made to be. But at the age of 23, his mother passes away, and after mom's death, who cares about the dad, right? As long as you don't make mom upset, right? He leaves home, and he spends 3 years, and he crosses. This is northern Italy, and so he spends 3 years in the wilderness, crossing the Alps. I remember flying from the first time I flew over the Alps. I was flying from. What was I flying from? Oh, I was flying from London to Rome. And the flight path goes right over, right? Well, it flew right over Paris, and I was like, oh, and took a picture. I zoomed it, and I found the Eiffel Tower. But as I was flying over the Alps, it was just the most beautiful sight, but it's vast. So Anselm spent 3 years. Huh? Yes, it is. Right. Well, some parts of it, yes. Yeah. But then it's vast, and so he spends 3 years crossing the Alps. And during that time, he meets a monk by the name of Lanfranc. Lanfranc is a very important person that we'll see. Lanfranc invites Anselm to come and join him in his abbey called the Abbey of Bec. It's in France. And it's a Benedictine monastery. So he basically, Lanfranc becomes like a mentor, much older than him, so he's like a mentor and a father figure to him, kind of guiding him. And from early on, Anselm has these gifts, intelligence. He is able to reason, logic, and deduce ideas. Within his first year in the monastery, at the abbey, Anselm completes his first work of philosophy. He writes a whole bunch of stuff. At the age of 30, Lanfranc, again his mentor, closest friend, is called to be an abbot of another abbey, and Anselm is then recommended to be the prior. So a prior is the second person. So the abbot is the head of the abbey, and then the secretary or the second hand or second in command is called the prior. And so at the age of 30, that's unheard of. And there was some dissension. There were some other monks that, thought they should get it, weren't happy. But, Anselm did get, apparently there's a lot of conflict in monasteries. They're not all just peaceful and praying all the time. So apparently there are other things that happen behind closed walls. So anyhow, he does become the prior and serving as a prior for 15 years. And after 15 years, he then becomes the abbot. And by that time, it is unanimous. They're elected, they're voted by the other brothers. And under Anselm's under Anselm's guidance, the Abbey of Bec becomes the foremost place of learning in Europe. It's because of all the things that Anselm starts writing. And we're going to actually end with one of his writings that is one of the most critical writings in church history. A few years later, in 1070, so Anselm is, 53? 6? 50? No. He was born in 33. So 33. How old is? 37. Okay. Now that should be easy, right? Anyhow, his mentor, Lanfranc, becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? So Canterbury is a very important cathedral, or it's a very important abbey, because it's basically St. Augustine is the one who established that monastery back in the 4th century, 4th century, and since then it's become the center for the Roman Catholic Church in all of England, right? So it is the primary. It's almost like the Bishop of Rome is the Pope of the Catholic Church. So there are bishops everywhere, right? There are archbishops everywhere, but whoever that is the Bishop of Rome is the Pope. So whoever is the Archbishop of Canterbury kind of oversees all of England. Anyhow, so Lanfranc becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, and then serves for almost 20 years. In 1089, Lanfranc dies of old age, and at that time, a new king comes to power. When Lanfranc was called, and usually in order to become the Archbishop, you are called by not just the Pope, it's in agreement with the king. right? And the king approves when Lanfranc became the Archbishop of Canterbury, he had a very good relationship with the king, King William I. And they actually, they may have differences in political ideas or whatever, but good relationship. His son, William II, was different. And so William II comes to power in like only a few years prior to Lanfranc dying. And so when Lanfranc dies, King William II refuses to install a new Archbishop of Canterbury. Why? Why do you think? What was the conflict between the church and the monarchy? Power? Money, right? Because monasteries had resources, a lot of resources. They take offering. But of course, kings are always eyeing the treasury of the church. And so William II wanted to have all the money, the treasury of the church. Now, why was that important? Was because during that time, again, the 11th century, 12th century was a time of the Crusades. It was a time of war, much war, right? William is fighting his other brother or something for Normandy and all of this. And war costs money. And because of war costs money, they wanted money. William II refuses to install a new archbishop. But a few years later, in 1093, William II becomes gravely ill, really ill. And by this time, he kind of knows that, the reason why he felt, so when he became gravely ill, he feels that he got ill because he was being disobedient to God, right? And the reason why that comes to mind was just a few months before he got ill. He got ill in March of 93. On Christmas Day of 92, a couple months before, he made a vow, in front of everyone on Christmas Day. There's the Christmas gift that he will be that Canterbury will never have a bishop again, and that he will be the one. So, at 93, a couple months afterwards, he gets gravely ill, and he feels, maybe that wasn't a good thing. So he calls Anselm over. He met Anselm once before when Lanfranc was the archbishop, and had a fond liking to Anselm. And so calls Anselm to hear his final confession and minister the last rites, which Anselm does, and he lives. Once you anoint them and they start living, there you go, miracle, right? And so then he invites Anselm to become the new archbishop, which Anselm reluctantly does. He didn't want to. He didn't want his abbey in Bec, Abbey of Bec in France, didn't want him to leave because it was the learning center at that time. Everyone from everywhere, it's like the Harvard of education, right? They all went to the Abbey of Bec to learn. And of course, it was all because of Anselm. But Anselm does accept, but immediately after he accepts to become the Archbishop of Canterbury, kings, they are, immediately, within a month of Anselm becoming the Archbishop, William II demands money from Anselm. And Anselm's like, okay, let's figure this out. He's new, but he's smart. And so he says, okay, we'll provide you with some money. William wants more. So then Anselm kind of negotiates, saying, okay, you know what? Up till now, there's been these conflicts. We need to have certain rules and standards, for the church. And if you allow the church to do this, then William said no. So Anselm said, all right, fine. A couple months later, some of the word gets back to Anselm saying, okay, the king is willing to accept your first offer, not the... So basically, he offered them 500 pounds. Back then, 500 pounds is huge. William wanted 1,000 pounds, right? I know. So then Anselm said no. Word gets around saying that William is willing to accept the 500 pounds, and Anselm's response is, I already gave it to the poor. And he says, in fact, it's too late. In fact, I would much rather, I'm glad that I gave it to the poor because it's much better than using the money to gain a master's favor. And he used some profanities, something about donkeys and horses. Anyhow, which again got on William's skin. During his time, he everything from money, everything from annulment of marriages, and all of this, he gets on the bad side of William II, and Henry I. In fact, Anselm is the one that was in the crosshairs when Henry VIII, this is Henry I, so it was long before. But Henry I and William II, they both exile him for months at a time. So that's the type of life that Anselm had to deal with. But he still served faithfully for 40 years. And then died in 1109. Okay, St. Anselm, so what is he known for? He's known for his philosophy, his thinking. Like I said, he was extremely intelligent. And some of the works, he has a whole bunch of works, but these are three that are primary in the Catholic Church theology. The monologian basically means monologue, and he basically writes a thesis about the reason of faith, why faith is important, or the reason why, when you say faith, some people think, well, if you just believe, that's it. But he actually broke it down of how faith works. The proselygian is the one probably the most important of his writing. It is a proof of the existence of God. And it is his proof basically that becomes the standard for the church. Why God is real. And you think in the 21st century, what are we? 22nd century? 21st century? We're 21st, right? 21st century, we're still debating this. But no one has been able to argue with his logic. So I'll explain what. And the Cur Deus Homo is, he wrote a thesis of why God was a man. Now, not the personification of it, but why God had to become man in Jesus. And basically, his understanding of the incarnation is what got developed. So, real quick, proving the existence of God. Anselm's definition is this. So you have to start with the definition. Okay, what does it mean, God? What is God? We have a sermon discussion group every Sunday, and that question seems to come up all the time. Define God. It was like, I can't define God. God is bigger than anything that you can define, right? That's what God is, right? God is bigger. There's no way to define it. Well, Anselm defined it as this. God is that which, or that than which, no greater can be conceived. Do you guys like that definition? So God is the ultimate good, right? God is better, greater than anything that you can ever conceive of. Sure, right? No matter what attribute or what conception you may have, that is God. It's not about a person or anything like that. It's just the concept of God is that which is greater than can ever be conceived. The study of ontology, ontological arguments, is the study of existence. Okay, and so his basic argument here, or his philosophy, has to do with how do you prove that God is real, right? That God truly exists and is not a figment of someone's imagination, which is the argument of a lot of people nowadays, right? I mean, seriously, if you can explain to people that this is real, people want a proof, like, show me God, right? But Anselm's like, no, you don't prove it that way. You have to think through it, because God is beyond anything that we can ever imagine. So Anselm says, there are two ways something exists. Either imaginary or real, right? You can think about something, and because you thought of it, it exists, but it exists in the imaginary realm, right? And there's things that that's real, and so therefore you say it exists, right? Imaginary things exist, like unicorns, right? Or Santa Claus. You know that's imaginary, right? Right? Okay. So they exist in our imaginary concepts. Not necessarily in real life. Doesn't need to be, right? Unicorns. How nice. But it's imaginary. And then whatever else that we can think of, imaginary, they exist in our imaginary world. Things exist in reality, like the world, people, right? We know that they exist in real life. And then Anselm said, any good thing is even better if it exists in reality, right? So a unicorn, that's nice in our imaginary world, but imagine there was a real unicorn. Wouldn't that be better? Right? Or Santa Claus, right? If Santa Claus was in real life, that would be better than Santa Claus being just an imaginary folktale, right? Logical. So then, you see where he's getting at? If God already exists in our minds, because the fact that people talk about God, right, means that the concept of God already exists, at least in our imaginary state. We can think about, if there was a God. Even people who are atheists say, there is no God because, if God existed, so they already have a conception of what a God could be like, right? So that's in the imaginary realm. And so Anselm is saying, okay, so God already exists in our minds, our imaginary realm. But if, again, the definition of God is that which is better, and since existing as reality is better than existing in imaginary, then God must exist in reality because God already exists in the imaginary. Did you guys get that? Did I lose you guys already? You don't get it?
But doesn't he exist because would he exist if you didn't talk to people? Just on your own, you're isolated. Isn't that, it exists because we talk about religion since you're born.
The fact that we talk about it is more of a validation of the fact that God already exists.
But it comes into your mind.
In our minds, exactly.
Because you hear about it, not just, what I'm saying is, does it come to you naturally
without even thinking? So a person, so this is, hypothetical, right? A child that, that is born in the desert and has no one around, so no parents, and just a child is born in the desert. Okay. Whatever that child can think of, God is better than that. Because you don't have to talk to someone to have a definition. The definition of God is just the definition of God. So whatever that child can think of, God is bigger than that, better than that. Right? So even if anyone, and even if that child never has a concept of what God is, or even has the vocabulary of God, that which that child can think makes the existence of God, it's almost a given, because anything that could be better is defined as a part of God.
So because we think he exists.
Exactly. And you know who said that? René Descartes. And I think, so because we think there is God.
Okay, thank you.
And René Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Anselm wrote this up in the 11th century. And for 1,000 years, philosophers, and not just theologians, because theologians already have start with the premise that God already exists. But philosophers argue with they don't even take that as a given, have argued against this logic, and no one has been able to really refute this because of the definition itself. If there's always something that is better, and that's the definition, then no matter what you come up with, there's always going to be something better. And the existence of God in Anselm's saying is the fact that we're already talking about it, thinking about it, arguing about it, and an atheist will argue. In fact, sometimes I think atheists argue more about God than any other person. And the very fact that they're arguing about it, Anselm says, proves that God is real. The fact that you think about it, argue about it, means the existence of it. So, you can go home and grapple with this all night long. St. Augustine's feast date is the 28th, and he is the patron saint of philosophers. Anyhow, all right. So, that's all for tonight. Like I said, you can grapple with that.